So my name's Katrina McHugh, and I am the artistic director of Open Clasp Theatre Company, and it's a theatre company I co-founded back in 1998. We're based in Newcastle upon Tyne. We work regionally, nationally, and internationally, and we meet communities of women and people where they're at, and we make the best theatre we can with the aim of changing the world one play at a time. Mycelial is a play, a production co-created with sex worker activists across the world. It has been on tour. It has been on tour to Ireland, in Dublin, Cork, Derry, and Belfast, in the north of England, in London, and been in two women's prisons, and it's now in New Zealand, and it's been screened in Wellington and just recently in Auckland. And within every screening of the production, there has been a post-show panel discussion in response to make space for conversation. And here today, we have panelists who've been with us on the tour, gathered for an online post-show panel discussion, and because Mycelial is about to go live online for people to watch. Why did we create the production? So back in the day, in 2016, Open Clasp Theatre Company became aware of the debate between decriminalisation of sex work and the Nordic model. And we became aware that the debate was really toxic. And we thought, as a theatre company, what can we do to help with that discussion and debate? Could we create a piece of theatre? We were at the North East Sex Workers Forum, discussed it with the people there, and they said, yes, you can. So we spent time raising funds and making the production. We ran workshops with groups across the world and wrote a play called Mycelial in response. And as I said, this has been on tour. So where did the Nordic model and decriminalisation of sex work come from? So the Nordic model was brought in Sweden in 1999, and it was with the aim of reducing the demand for the sex work industry by criminalising the sex buyer. And 4 years later, in New Zealand, they brought in the decriminalisation of sex work. And for 2 decades since then, there's been lots of debate around which model is the right model or the one that works best. But most people have took the Nordic model, and very few have took the decriminalisation of sex work model on, which is the only model that's led by sex workers themselves. So that's a really brief kind of background, but I'm not the expert. This panel is the expert. And now I'm very, very proud to introduce Dame Catherine Healy, who is the founder of the New Zealand Sex Workers Collective, and was made a Dame for her work in terms of the rights of sex workers. And I'm going to ask Catherine to say a few words in relation to the history of decriminalisation of sex work in the past and where we are now in terms of the reality on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina, for the introduction. I was a sex worker when we formed our organisation in 1987, and right from that period we grew our awareness around the need to reform the law, and the model of decriminalisation had been discussed across the globe with different sex worker rights-based organisations. For us, of course, our near neighbours in Australia had been very active in reforming the law, and we looked at some of the states there, New South Wales in particular, Sydney, and Melbourne, the state of Victoria, where they had two different models, one of decriminalisation in New South Wales and one of legalisation in Victoria, Melbourne. So we had these active models that we could draw on, and when we got down in the in terms of drafting our model, we were fortunate in that we had a lot of information to compare what we wanted and our experiences on the ground. The law in New Zealand at that time when we formed was very similar to law around the Commonwealth countries. So it wasn't against the law for us to be sex workers. It was against the law for us to solicit, to ask for money in a public place for sex, and public places, if you can appreciate, were sometimes darkened rooms that were didn't seem like public places to us, massage parlours, etc. So, practically anywhere where we worked as sex workers in those days were deemed to be public places, and we could be entrapped and were entrapped, in fact, with police pretending to be our clients and charged with soliciting. So we had issues, certainly. But anyway, we pushed on and pushed for public support to build our movement related to decriminalisation. And that was achieved in 2003. A private member in Parliament, Tim Barnett, formerly from England, became our sponsor and champion in the Parliament. And we sat with Tim and allies from the YWCA, the National Council on Women supported us, the Business and Professional Women's Federation. They became our very strong allies in the call for decriminalisation. So that was achieved in 2003 with conditions that still exist, conditions that we're upset by, actually. If you're a migrant and you intend to come to New Zealand to be a sex worker, you can't. You can come here and do any other occupation, but you can't come to New Zealand and be a sex worker. So, we haven't achieved full decriminalisation. But right now, the majority of sex workers who are citizens in this country can work independently. They can buddy up and work with friends. They can have a manager. They can work in brothels, the traditional structures that brothels have. They can meet clients on the street without fear of being entrapped. So the landscape from the days when I was a sex worker has changed dramatically. Of course, when I was a sex worker, I had to pretend I wasn't. I was working with a whole peer group in a massage parlour. We had to pretend that we were masseuses, and periodically the police would come in and entrap us and pretend to be our clients, and we'd be hauled off to court, prosecuted, fined for soliciting. And the same with my friends and peers who worked on the streets to meet their clients. They'd be entrapped as well. So decriminalisation has really changed the landscape. Clients are allowed to pay us. We are allowed to negotiate with our clients. Managers who hire us into brothels are allowed to explain the real nature of the work. When I was a sex worker starting out, I had no idea when I banged on the door of the massage parlour to ask for work that I was actually being recruited into a brothel. So, we can share information. We don't have to talk in code like we used to. We can say out loud that, safe sex is important to us. We don't have to worry that our condoms are going to be used against us to create circumstantial evidence that we are breaking the law, as happened in my day. So vastly different circumstances. We still suffer from stigma and discrimination. Our friends in Australia, in the state of Queensland, have achieved anti-discrimination legislation, as have our friends in Melbourne, Australia, Victoria, the state of Victoria, and the Northern Territories. So anti-discrimination legislation is really important. So we've got some work to do here in New Zealand to achieve full decriminalisation. But yeah, certainly it's a lot better and safer. And the statistics in relation to the reduction in terms of crimes committed against us are impressive. So thank you. There's lots of research. You can look at the research and you'll see that decriminalisation, full decriminalisation, is the better model, and that the Nordic model is certainly not a model that you would get in behind if you're serious about supporting people. sex workers to prevent violence or exploitation or any of the other harms that are created by bad models of legislation.
Catherine, thanks so much. I'm going to introduce Anna Pickering now, who's the Regional Coordinator for the New Zealand Sex Workers Collective in Auckland. And as Catherine has said, she's a tornado of creativity and a brilliant sex work rights activist. And she was also one of our co-creators with Mycelial. So I'd like to just introduce Anna now.
Hello, kia ora koutou, everyone. My name's Anna Pickering, and I have lived experience as a sex worker pre-decrim and have worked post-decrim in Australia, New South Wales, and retired from sex work more or less in 2003, and have been involved in sex work activism in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and globally, talking about decrim and the impact of the positive change of the law. I guess I'm going to talk about the Nordic model. My experience with the Nordic model was actually when we were in New Zealand Parliament in 2003, the night that the bill passed. There were feminist groups who were opposing the decrim, brought a American academic over called Melissa Farley, who was championing the Nordic or the Swedish model back then. And most of us had never even heard of it, only other than that it was to criminalise the buyer of sex and third parties, which were either sex workers who were working together, or if you had a family member or a partner that was going to, watch out for you where you worked, that they would also be criminalised. And at that time in 2003, when we heard these opposition arguments, it was to stop the demand of sex work, and it almost, in my opinion, always feels like a white saviour, and it's really, really harmful. When I've spoken to peers in Sweden and in Ireland, my peers talk about experiences around raids and occupation homelessness. So, for example, if you had a landlord, or you had a place organised where you wanted to work as a private worker, you aren't able to, because people could ring up authorities, the council, the police, and basically come knocking on your door, kicking your door down, and you'd end up homeless and you wouldn't have anywhere to go. I know, like with some of my peers in Sweden, there was a case where a worker who had been a victim of domestic violence, but her children went back into care of her partner, and then she ended up murdered. And there's many cases like that under the Nordic model where it has impacted sex workers' lives, their children, because it's harmful. And in our experience in New Zealand anyway, it's quite the opposite. We have occupational safety and health. We have, we're able to go to court like what do we call it? Small claims tribunal. If a brothel owner doesn't pay us our money, or if a client doesn't pay us our money, we can go through a process and challenge that and be and actually win some successful cases. We've also had a brothel owner that was charged for sexual harassment, and that was world leading in the world. And with that particular case, a sex worker, he came into NZPC and then went to the Human Rights Tribunal, and they picked up her case. So her case set a precedence. We've also had cases where we have things called rape by stealthing, where clients have been prosecuted and sent to prison for removing a condom without a sex worker's consent. I know, although it sounds unbelievable, like what is this? But I can tell you from our lived experience working here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, where sex workers decrim, that sex workers have rights. The other thing is with sex workers globally, we also have allies globally, like we have the Human Rights Watch, we have Amnesty International that oppose the Nordic model and are upholding full decriminalisation of sex work. And this has been a huge global campaign by sex workers globally that uphold decriminalisation as the way forward. And that's all I'm going to say. But in saying that, when in our experience of co-creating Mycelial, it was really inspiring to meet other peers from Ireland and UK, as well as in Aotearoa New Zealand, where we were able to share our experiences, but also we want to really touch people's hearts and minds about the impact of the law, and that we really need public support and allies to come along and, you know, go and speak to your local politician or come and approach sex worker-led groups and really just stand next to us to fight against the Nordic model. Thank you.
Anna, thank you so much. Thank you. That was brilliant. And we're going to have an opportunity at the end to have more of a group chat, but I really appreciate your words, and Catherine too. Thank you. So next up we have Dr. Adeline Berry, and we have Leah Berry too. And Leah is the chair of Sex Worker Alliance Ireland, and Addie and Leah were both our co-creators with Mycelial too. And I've asked them to come onto the panel just to talk a little bit about the Nordic model and the intersectionality that's represented in Mycelial too. So over to Addie and Leah, and it's lovely to see you both again.
Thank you for having us. Who wants to go first?
You go first.
Okay, so I don't know whether I need to go into the history of the Nordic model in Ireland. I guess I can briefly. That it was brought in by a large coalition of NGOs and trade unions that should know better, but it was spearheaded by 3 organizations. One of these organizations, Ruhama, it's one of the white savior type organizations, and I mentioned. And that organization was founded by 2 of the religious orders who were involved in the Magdalene Laundries, the Good Shepherd Sisters and the Religious Sisters of Charity. If you're not familiar with the Magdalene Laundries, I suggest Googling it. But it was a system of slavery and trafficking and industrial labor that came out of collusion between the state and the police and the Catholic Church in Ireland. And that relationship is still very, very tight and weighs heavily on sex work laws in Ireland. So one of the organizations that spearheaded the movement was formed by 2 of those religious charities. The other one was Immigrant Council Ireland, which was formed by the Religious Sisters of Charity and the Religious Sisters of Charity themselves. So it was very much a church-led movement, and there was a lot of talk in the lead up by wealthy NGO ladies and wealthy white politicians about how it would improve things, it would make it safer for sex workers to approach the police, with whom they've never had great relationships, honestly. When the girls and women were placed in the Magdalene Laundries all the way up until 1996, the police would, and the church would march them through the streets in a fake bridal procession to humiliate them for becoming pregnant out of wedlock, while the church enslaves and traffics their children. It's a whole bad setup, but that is the relationship, and those are the same parties who are involved in enforcing sex work law now. So when, I think right before COVID lockdown hit, Sex Workers Alliance Ireland and called for a meeting with senior police, the Gardaí in Ireland. And we sat down, and the head of sex work policing informed us that he would actually, if he had heard that a police officer was harassing a sex worker for religious reasons, he would support that. They said it was a pretty traumatic meeting. In a previous meeting with the Minister for Justice at that time, Frances Fitzgerald, in a meeting between her and sex workers and lawyers, they informed her that bringing in this law would increase violence against sex workers, which it has. And she admitted that she knew that. She acknowledged that, but she hoped the violence would discourage others from engaging in sex work. So something to bring to bear too is that, there was a lot of talk from wealthy white savior types on how this would improve matters for sex workers. But this is all taking place too during the biggest housing crisis Ireland's ever had, where people are renting out kitchens with 8 bunk beds in it, kind of a situation. It is illegal in Ireland to rent to a sex worker during a housing crisis. So you have to be, I mean, we all know that vulnerable people, disabled people, migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, intersex people, transgender people are overly represented in sex work because of discrimination and poverty and inequality. Under these laws, sex workers have to be able to independently buy their own property during the highest housing prices in Irish history. If you're under these laws, you cannot work with, you cannot live with a spouse or a roommate. During COVID, one of our kids was sharing a toilet with 17 people. That's just the housing situation in Ireland. You have to live alone as a sex worker. You can't live with a spouse. Spouses have been arrested for sharing grocery money and whatnot. Therefore, you are now being accused of being a pimp. It's a ridiculous situation. And considering it's supposed to improve life for sex workers, it really hasn't. Very few clients have been arrested. When we were raided and violently harassed and assaulted and everything by police and then evicted, the client was let go on his way. We were the ones who end up losing everything that we had. One of these, and you've got to bear in mind too, although I'm transgender and intersex, I have privilege as an Irish person. Also, I'm aware we are white. We are white sex workers in Ireland. One of us has Irish citizenship, and that only protected us so far. So how much worse do you think would be for somebody with less privilege? They're certainly going to be deported. There was 2, I believe, Romanian young women in 2019 under a law that's supposed to make you safer. They were caught working together, no money, no clients. There was so little money the judge made fun of them in court. All they had was condoms. One of the ladies was pregnant. They both got 9 months in prison. One of those women had to deliver her child in prison for the crime of working with another woman for safety, the way police do. You never see a policeman or woman by themselves. They work together for safety. But the most marginalized people and most vulnerable people in society are not allowed to do the same for our own protection, apparently. Sorry, I talked a lot. Have you?
No, that's fine. Yeah, I think Adeline said it all. We were, Sway is working for decrim of sex work. It's to be able to, for sex workers to be able to simply be able to work with other people, to be able actually to decriminalize. If we could decriminalize in Ireland, then that means that we could work on worker rights, and that way we could work with each other. We could have rights if management is cruel to us, or just basic human rights, really.
Rent an apartment.
Have
exactly. A roommate.
Yeah, or a spouse.
Live with your spouse.
Yeah, these are all things that you cannot do in Ireland under the Nordic model right now. So,
and it's so violent. I mean, we since what happened to us was what we were subjected to. We've been pretty active because it has happened shortly after we had moved back to Ireland, from the US, where it's fully criminalized, and we actually had less sexual harassment and harassment from police, which I'm aware I'm generalizing. That's just our experience. I'm not speaking about full criminalization. But one of the pieces we were involved with was actually funded by the quote-unquote Justice and Equality Department. And it did show that under this law, looking at sex workers' experiences, street workers' experiences in 2 different cities, 80% had experienced abuse by the police, 1/5 of them sexually, under laws that they were told. And they weren't asked. Their opinions weren't gathered. They were spoken over and spoken for. But these are the laws that are supposed to make things better, according to rich women and nuns with a long history of human trafficking and slavery themselves.
Yeah, I think she said it all.
Thank you, Addie and Leah. I can hear your voices echoing in Mycelial too as you both speak. Thank you so much. Right, moving on, I'm going to introduce Megan. First, Meg, who is a trustee with Ugly Mugs and also a theatre maker. And then after that, I'll go straight into Lindsay, who's a coordinator with Ugly Mugs in Sunderland, I believe.
So hello everyone, I'm Lindsay from National Ugly Mugs. I'm a coordinator, and I always get a strange look when I say who I work for because of the name, but I do think it's quite fitting given what we're talking about this evening, because it's a legacy passed down to us from our fellows in New Zealand there with the ugly mugs that they used to pass around in person to warn each other about dangers that they may come across. And I think it's nice that it has been passed on to us. We've been around for about 12 years, and we weren't always called National Ugly Mugs. It's before my time, but I think it was a very long title of like UK something sex workers. So I feel like Ugly Mugs is much nicer, definitely, for us. So bit of an introduction about Ugly Mugs, and then I'll pass to Megan, who can tell you a little bit more about why we firmly believe in decriminalisation. So as I said, Ugly Mugs has been around for about the last 12 years, and we are involved in all kinds of ending harm against sex workers. And that is from harm reduction measures. We send out alerts to sex workers that have either reported into us, or we send the details out to them of things that have happened to them, so everyone can make informed decisions about the work that they want to do. And we also then offer support, victim support and one-on-one support through our casework team for anyone who does need that support going forward. We've got around, I think we had a little celebration actually, we've got around 10,000 members in the UK now, which is an amazing number, and a vast proportion of that is sex workers themselves. We do have a few organisations and practitioners that also support us by being members, but it's the vast majority is sex workers that we work with. And the main thing I think that we're known for, especially in the format that we're talking about now, is the safety side of things, so the reports of harm. And I did some quick Lindsay maths, which might not be the best maths, but it's close enough. Since the inception of NUM, it's like just under 3 million reports have been circulated around sex workers within the UK. So that would be that a sex worker has reported act of violence, whatever that might be. I know a few of my peers there have talked about some of the different acts of violence, and then we have then shared that back with sex workers so that they could make an informed decision about their next job or what it is that they're going to do for if they need to engage with that client, they can be prepared. So just under 3 million, sorry, checking my numbers there. But interestingly, we came about before it was Ugly Mugs. It's almost part of like a government and police initiative to try and gather that information, because as everyone's been saying, sex workers don't speak to the police, or we don't want to speak to the police because of the consequences that are put on us from there. But we've since moved away from that police funding, and now we're completely independent, which means that we have a lot of trust from the community, and we get a lot of reports that don't fully go to the police. We help people, but we don't then share the full information with the police because people don't want to do that. I think the percentages have been on a slow decline. And I think we're around 10% of reports now that we receive that actually give consent to share that information with the police. So that's National Ugly Mugs. We have a few different projects that we work through, and Megan can tell you a little bit more about the law that we want to champion as much as possible.
Thanks, Lindsay. So hi everyone, my name's Meg and I am the chair of the board of National Ugly Mugs. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the reality in England for sex workers and why we're championing for decriminalisation. So currently we've got a part criminalised model of sex work legislation in England. And this means that the actual selling of sex itself is not illegal, but working together for safety, advertising sexual services, or basically doing anything to contact a client is illegal. So some of the legislation currently in place in England can maybe sound reasonable to well-meaning civilians, like the anti-brothel keeping laws, but in practice, almost all of these laws end up harming sex workers rather than protecting them. So I think when a lot of people hear brothel, especially if they've got no experience of sex work, they might think of things that they've seen in TV and films, which are like harmful representations about seedy establishments run by men. And they think, yeah, good. Yeah, men shouldn't be able to do that. But in reality, under the current English law, any place where 2 or more workers are working together, even if they're not there at the same time, is considered to be a brothel. So essentially, if 2 sex workers are working together for safety from the same flat, they both could be at risk of being charged with brothel keeping. And the maximum charge for brothel keeping is 7 years in prison, a criminal record, a fine, and potentially being put on the sex offenders list. So I don't know about anyone else, but those things don't really speak to me in terms of keeping sex workers safe. And some research from Ireland shows that 85% of people convicted of brothel keeping are actually women. Another example of some of these medieval measures that we've still got under English law is prostitute cautions. So you might not have heard of prostitute cautions because it's a very old-fashioned thing, but despite what a lot of the police will say, it does still exist and they are still given out. And a prostitute's caution is very different from a regular police caution. So a police caution can usually only be issued on the basis of the person accepting guilt for the offence that they're being cautioned about. A prostitute's caution doesn't. A prostitute's caution can be issued to anyone that the police believe is loitering or soliciting, but they don't actually have to have any evidence of either. You can't choose not to accept a prostitute's caution like you can a regular caution. There is 0 right of appeal against a prostitute caution. And a police caution, a regular one, is spent after 2.5 years. And after 6 years, it's filtered from your record and you don't need to disclose it to employers. But a prostitute's caution will show up on someone's enhanced DBS check until they are 100 years old, which I think just goes to show you how old these laws are. It's just insane that there would be anything that is on your record till you're 100 years old. The English Collective of Prostitutes recently had a parliamentary launch of their research into the impact of these prostitutes' cautions on sex workers' lives. And there was a woman who was in her 60s who spoke about a prostitute's caution that she was given over 30 years ago, which is still impacting her ability to get a job as a cleaner. So prostitute cautions are really just one example of how the current English laws on sex work are not in place to protect sex workers. They are really just there to punish them. What we are fighting for and what almost all sex workers are fighting for is decriminalisation, which is the removal of criminal laws that are specific to sex work. So all other laws that apply to business or anything else would still apply. And that means that trafficking, theft, exploitation, harassment, and assault would all still be illegal, even if sex work was decriminalised. But if sex work was decriminalised, then sex workers could feel safer reporting instances of violence, instances of trafficking or exploitation, if and when they suspect it might be occurring. But we've seen through research, through evidence, countless years in the making that criminalising an industry in any way often just emboldens abusers because they know that sex workers will be too scared of facing punitive measures themselves to report a crime. I think we've mentioned before that decrim was introduced in New Zealand in 2003, and I think it's now like 90% of sex workers in New Zealand said that they've got more employment and safety rights. organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the World Health Organization, and the Global Alliance Against Trafficking Women all support decrim, based on overwhelming evidence that it is the best way to reduce violence that sex workers face. So that is why NUM is actively fighting for decrim. I am now going to pass back to Lindsay, who's going to talk a bit about how to be a good ally to sex workers.
Thanks, Meg.
Thanks.
So as part of our campaign, we realized recently that we were getting a lot of questions from people about how can I help. For me, seeing Mycelial, I was really, really lucky, and I got to see the show that it was actually most recorded at, which in Newcastle. And honestly, it was so good to see myself represented accurately in something, because so often it's a very skewed or weaponized view of sex workers that you get there. So it was really, really good to see myself in it. But also I feel like it has helped, as part of helping folks be a good ally, it's a nice door opener. It's a nice starting point for everyone. Like, I feel as though if someone said, I don't really understand the politics behind it all. In the past, I might have signposted people to various books and things and said, go and read Revolting Prostitutes. But not everyone wants to sit down and do that. But I can signpost them to watch this, and it will definitely convey the feeling of how sex workers feel about the law and feel about the way we're treated. And it was such a good way to see it play out, and you could really tell that he had worked so closely with sex workers to be able to get the stories through, because there was little moments that I think stood out to me anyway, and to other people I've spoken to as part of it. So in terms of being a good ally, once people have seen Mycelial and they have some of that context there, we just stick with support full decriminalisation, and there are loads of ways that people can do that from their house. You can find your local MP and send them a letter that asks their opinions on sex work laws in the UK. There's some fantastic templates and tools. The English Collective of Prostitutes, Decrim Now, quite a lot of the other organisations, National Ugly Mugs has it. There's links to how you can challenge those in power around you. And I think it's really useful, particularly now that we've got a brand new government, and it doesn't hurt to start sending letters to a new group of people and try and make ourselves be heard. So yeah, you can, find out who around you is pro or not pro decriminalisation from there. You can also help us combat the misconception and stigma by even knowing a little bit, like some of the facts that all of us have been talking about tonight. It means that if you find yourself in a conversation with people about sex work, you can challenge some of those norms that are fed through different media and different, outlets, things like that. And also, got my notes here, I'm sorry, I just have a quick look. Yeah, I'm sure that we're going to get some lovely links and stuff put after this. But yeah, follow sex worker-led organisations. Listen to what sex workers have to say, and that will absolutely set you in good stead for being a good ally.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Meg. Thank you so much. Thank you. Right, I'm going to move on to Abby Watson, who's one of our amazing co-creators, who is also a specialist caseworker with sex workers, and she's based in Newcastle upon Tyne, and she's a very special person to the company. So Abby, I'd like to introduce you now to say a few words.
Hello, is all right? Okay, so it's lovely to see you all again. Really, really nice. Yeah, as Katrina said, I'm Abby, and my sex work, I'll just go a bit about my sex work was started from a very young age of 15 years old, and it was a forced forced to go into sex work for a pimp back in the 80s and 90s, down a few hundred miles away from here in the West Midlands. Managed to get away from that, jumping forward, and found I became an independent sex worker, and became able to work independently within the saunas in Edinburgh, which became a different, as we can see in the play, Mycelial beautifully did that. Scenes of when I arrived in Edinburgh and started my next journey in sex work, which wasn't all great, but it was much more. I got away from the violence and the sexual violence of rape and grooming and trafficking down in the West Midlands, and created an independent sex worker. So from what I do now, so I became a co-creator for Mycelial, which was approached by Katrina whilst I was in the support system, because of the sex work and because of the trauma I've come back in time. And I was introduced to Katrina and on the Red Umbrellas, and came forward and I was offered to share them experiences, obviously within Mycelial and the Zooms that were had throughout COVID. So the work that I have now and what I do now is I'm a specialist caseworker, and I work for those who are involved in sex work. So it's not just work to me, it's actually, it feels quite normal to be involved with the ladies, the clients, the lads and lasses. And for me, there is a fight, which continues every day in my job where I've been today as well, for our girls, and exploitation, and that I'm part of now. So the financial, the sexual, the drugs, the homelessness, the trauma, the mental health, the rapes, and also the police. There's also a fight to stay alive with some of my clients that we have, and those that are slipping away. The fight is ending, and I see that every week in the job that I do within the Northeast. The women who are being hidden in brothels still within the Northeast from villages in Romania, they're being moved from place to place. They're vulnerable and they're unable to speak English. They're coming from villages where they're trafficked through, and they're in the Northeast, not very far away from where I am now. And the question is that the police come along, and they'll counsel, the police, they'll shut it down. And where do they go, and are they safe? That's what we are worried, concerned of in my role. Where are they actually going? They're unsafe. The decriminalisation gets rid of them and the pimps, those who feel it's okay to damage and use women to gain financially. It gets rid of that. Away with being arrested, like we've said, for working with other women, and that is only because we want to be safe and we work as a team within the brothels, within the flats, within that would be, at this moment, people would be arrested for that. And the criminal records, the fines that are unrealistic to pay and are not already competitive industry, and to stop the exploitation, and to stop the need to feel ashamed and frowned upon and judged, to stop the need to hide. And it's called rights, and it's called freedom, and it's called power, and that's what sex workers across the world should be entitled to as a human right, and that's what I feel, and I thank you.
No, thank you so much. Thank you. That was great. Thank you for that contribution. Brilliant. I'm moving on to our last panelist. And it's Gaynor Truman, and she's the Chief Executive of the North East Sex Workers Forum, and she's going to speak a little bit about sex workers in their rights in prison, and I'd like to bring her on now because she can explain better than me. Okay, thank you.
So I'm Gaynor. I'm the CEO of the North East Sex Work Forum. We've been going now for about 14 years as a forum, and we've been a charity for about the last 3 years. I've worked alongside people in the sex industry for about 20 odd years now, and we work towards policy and system change. And part of that, obviously, we massively campaign for decriminalisation, harm reduction, safety for people in the industry. And part of that and the policy and system change has been working with our local women's prison. Up until 2007, there was 7 resettlement pathways within the prison, within the women's prison estate, which was things like accommodation, family, relationships. Then in 2007, there was a review and 2 more pathways were added. Pathway 8, which is domestic abuse and assault, and Pathway 9, which is sex work. And that was because it was recognised as another layer of discrimination upon incarcerated people, but also, again, on sex workers. So we wanted to do a project within the prison because we've worked in and out of our local prison for a long time, but never any coordinated work. And so we got together with a gang of women in there. We didn't want to do research on them. We researched with them, and they did the research with us. And it was really finding out what they felt were the gaps in knowledge on Pathway 9, because it is largely ignored across the women's prison estate, and really the assumptions that people thought of who they were, why they were in prison, and that type of thing. And it really does speak around the inconsistent laws that we've all talked about today, because as, for example, one of the women told us her story. She was in on remand. She was in for robbery. She was looking at 18 months to 3 years, simply because a customer refused to pay her. So what happened was she was down the alleyway. She obviously had to hide because she was street sex work, which is illegal in the UK under our current laws. So they did business down an alleyway, but when they come out and they were under the light, he refused to pay her. So she took his wallet. He had no money, so she took his phone. That's what was picked up on the camera, and so she was looking at a face robbery within, and she did actually get. I think she got just over 2 years for that. So this is what we're looking at because of inconsistent laws. So what we did was we really created a platform for the women to talk about Pathway 9, and really what they said was they just wanted to be able to talk about their experiences, not in a call you way, but in a this is what we did, this is how we felt. One of the women, which I love this quote, said, when we come to your group, we felt minging, and then when we leave, we felt fresh. And so they were able to talk about sex for the first time, I think, than they've ever been in prison. We are hoping now we are applying for some funding to start a forum within the prison. And that will be about just giving them a safe space to speak about their experiences, what they want to do. There's a lot of assumption about a lot of people come out of prison, they're not going to go back into sex work. The majority will, and they need to know more about the safety. We want to work with NUM about the NUM's new project, Changing the Game. If some of them in prison do want to leave the sex industry when they leave prison, how can we help them transfer the skills to other jobs, that type of thing. And that's what we've been doing. And then also working with the women, we want to do a set of principles of through the gate for when they come out of prison. What do they actually want from services? What do they want from the sex industry? How can we help them be safer? So, yeah, so that's our work. We also work across our area. We wrote a harm reduction strategy for sex work, and that has involved raising awareness and training sessions with all services, and we've just been commissioned to do some training with our local police, so there's a consistent narrative, and that includes looking at brothel legislation. So yeah, a lot going on. We just had an event last Friday where we played the play. I just think is just an amazing vehicle for people to, and what we loved, me and Carly were there, and you know, other people were there, Addy and Leah and Abby were there on Friday. And what we loved was people spoke in the morning, and then it was almost like they gave an example in the afternoon in the play, and it all come alive of what people were saying about their experiences. And I just think Open Class have created a massive vehicle for change, and I really would say to everybody, just go and see it. Sit with your mates with some popcorn and really enjoy yourselves and learn about the discrimination of what people face just for going to work and earning some money to support themselves. But yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Gaynor, thank you so much. Right, that is all of our panels have spoken and shared. Is there anything you feel hasn't been said that needs to be said?
I just wanted to add, I was supposed to say this during my speaking bit, but I forgot. A bit about why I think people should watch Mycelial. And I think we spoke about this a bit at a live panel, and I think I said to you, Katrina, that whenever there's a project, especially if it's got some type of entertainment form to it, it makes me happy because I can talk to people and try and get them to watch documentaries and read books and like legislation and all this to try and get them to see how unfair the laws are about sex work and how much it needs to change. But sadly, a lot of people that don't have any vested interest in sex work, I can't get them to do it, and we can't impact social change. We can't impact legislative change if social change doesn't happen. So when there is pieces of work like Mycelial, I'm like, oh, thank God I can, so like Lindsay said, signpost people to this and say like, yes, it's educational, but also you get something out of it. It's a very entertaining piece of work. So I did just want to say that I think it's an amazing piece of work, and I'm so glad it exists. And I feel like it's like vital viewing for anyone that cares about human rights. So thank you.
Abby.
I just want to say, right, that I feel this whole journey of this play it's about time. Like, I've never seen anything. I've seen documentaries. I've been on some documentaries on telly, but I've never seen, like, you've seen the documentaries, you see the news, you see over the years, even like before the phones and all that. You've never seen anything like this, and I think it's real, it's honest, it's impactful, and it's across. It's not just affecting Northeast, it affects the whole of the world. And prostitution, working girls, as we were called, when I worked in sex work, I was called a working girl, and that was here before any of us. That industry, that was here before any of us, and I feel like being part of this has been incredible for me. I've never had my voice opened and been able to speak so freely about my experiences, but to be part of, for me, everyone else's experiences and meeting some beautiful and really strong, powerful people has really had an impact on me. And if it's had an impact on me, it should have an impact on those who aren't involved in sex work or who they need to stop and listen, because when you watch it and hear all the different things that sex workers anyone can be a sex worker, literally, and that's what it says. And I think everyone need that impact, whether they're involved in sex work or not, is going to be incredible, and it should be pulled out more. Sorry, I just had to say that because I'm dead emotional.
Don't be sorry.
It's so true. No one's ever. Sorry. Yeah.
Where have you gone? Oh, there you are. You flipped over. And then Leah and Adi. And I'd like to ask Catherine and Anna just to think about sharing the experiences of having Mycelial here in New Zealand with the audiences, because nobody else here has witnessed that. So I'll do Adi and Leah first, and then we'll go Catherine and Anna just to share some of the responses from the audiences here. So Adi and Leah first.
One thing I'd like to say is that one of the things that I appreciate about what we've all managed to create together is we've lifted up stories. And that's one of the things that has been taken from us by these systems, along with our housing, our children, our friends, our social support networks, that we're all familiar with stigma. There are several things that put us in a position where we do speak out, we do show our face. Honestly, we had nothing left to lose. We had lost everything but our lives. So we are face out. We've already lost everything. They've taken everything they could take from us, other than our lives. But there is so much stigma which keeps sex workers from speaking out and telling their stories, and that allows the religious organizations and the powerful NGOs to dehumanize us, to paint a picture for everybody else. It's that saving the Aryan, precious, virginal woman from the evil men whole narrative, and they use that to bring in millions of funding and destroy sex worker lives. So one of the things that the world really needs like we put on an art show for International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers a couple of years ago in Dublin. And we took in art from all kinds of people, poems about just everyday things in sex workers' lives, laundry, their pets, paintings of flowers, because sex workers like flowers too. And it was just what we wanted to do with that show was just give sex workers a chance to fight against the dehumanization that's done by those who purport to act on our behalf. So one of the things that I appreciate about this is taking our stories, elevating them in a very, very accessible way. You don't need to go and spend $30 on an academic journal that's written badly and a pain in the ass to read. It's just right there, very accessible. You can just watch it and absorb it, and we need more of this.
Thank you. Over to Catherine and Anna. This end of the world, that I'm on my feet are on the same ground that yours is on in Auckland and Wellington, not Wellington, outside Wellington. Audience responses, Catherine or Anna or both.
I was incredibly moved and reminded too, when you work and it's criminalised, I had a lot of feelings that were historical feelings, I thought long gone for me, related to the days when we were criminalised. I just wanted to share a story I forgot. I was in court recently, and I'm sometimes called in to be an expert independent witness, although I don't think I am independent. I'm quite clearly on the side of sex worker rights, but it was a case of an operator of a brothel who hadn't paid tax. And the judge sat there and gave him a lecture about the reason that you have to pay tax. And the operator was a migrant brothel operator. And, he was in a semi-vulnerable position, really. He hadn't paid tax for about 7 years, and he owed something like £500,000 in back tax. So after the lecture, the judge said to him, well, I've got all these references from your workers, your sex workers, and they like you. Clearly, you're a good boss. And I don't want them to be unemployed. So instead of sending you to prison, which is really what I ought to be doing for the crime that you've committed and not paying tax, I'm going to make sure that you have home detention so you can continue to operate your brothel, so the sex workers who are working for you won't lose their job. And that, I think, was just the kind of judgment we want to see more of. And I thank you, Katrina McHugh, for Mycelial. And it's fantastic to meet all the co-creators and, all the emotions that it stimulated in my tired old body. I mean, honestly, I hope people take their brains, their hearts, their spirits to this show, and everything is impacted. Thank you so much. Ngā mihi nui.
Thank you, Catherine. Anna, have you got any words you'd like to say about what the audience response over here?
Yeah, it's crazy. I think like back a year ago, we were in Newcastle and Tyne, and I think we watched the show probably 7 times in person. But to have the show down here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we had the screening in Wellington and Auckland. They both have been different vibrations, and I can just tell you that, like, sitting behind me, I could hear people crying, and then just when the lights go back on, before we go back on the panel, they're really impacted by what they've seen. It's just full of a wave of emotions, trauma, drama, but also I know for the peer sex workers, where they feel like their stories are come through the screen, and it touches all workers who aren't able to come out and speak about those lived experiences because we're either in the closet or, around stigma, discrimination. But for the Auckland screening, we had homeless services come in, a government agency that assists us with access to benefits for sex workers. And we even had an ex-cop. And, they've sent me texts and messages saying that, for all the co-creators that shared these stories with collaboration with Open Class, it was so impactful and courageous. They'd never seen anything like that before, and just said, wow, there's not a tear in the cinema who watched that. And even when I watch it, I'm so overwhelmed, but just really proud of the piece of work. And because for many of us who live this life, whether you're, past, former or current sex worker, it's not it's not about the shame, but it's just you're not able to share that with people unless you're with your peers or and to see that, I can't wait to see where it goes. So we hope that it creates we live in New Zealand, so we've got earthquakes, but a ripple effect of earthquake and a tsunami that will really get people on board about decriminalisation and screw the Nordic model, because don't give up to our Northern European peers and allies. It's the fight must continue. Yeah. And it's crazy because sex work and homelessness have been around from the beginning of time. So I'm just like, why would you harm the poor and harm people who are doing a great service? It's just fucked up.
Look what co-creation and true collaboration can achieve, and that you should, especially the co-creators who are in the room today, what you have achieved and the impact the show has had, and we can witness, and we're only at the beginning. It's even like here, people are saying it needs to be in Australia, it's gonna go, and we will, as a company, we will work really hard to make sure that it continues to reach for generations to come, and it does what it should do, which is change the world one play at a time.